Welcome to CEO Confidential from Frank Pagano. Pierangelo, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, Frank. Good to see you again. Who is with us today?
Pierangelo, today we have a grand maestro of marketing and business. Before we meet our special guest, we're going to run just a few seconds, a few bits of information about him. Scott, welcome to CEO Confidential. Thank you very much for being with us. Rules are rules. Question for you. Who are you and what do you do for a living?
My name's Scott Galloway. I'm a professor of marketing at NYU Stern School of Business. I also host several podcasts and I'm an author.
Excellent. Another question for you. You just published your latest book. Can you tell us a little bit about it? What's the main idea? What are the main themes? Without spoiling it, because I still need to buy it.
So the name of the book is Adrift, American 100 Charts, and it's an attempt to outline some of the biggest issues that are ailing Western democracies and explain the issue and then propose some solutions using charts. We've had words for 1,500 years. We've had images for 15,000 years. So I think it's easier to tell a story with infographics and charts, and that's what we've tried to do here.
Yes, listen, Scott, what exponential technologies do you personally follow closely? And which one do you think will shape our future as businesses and as a society as a whole?
Well, I'll start with what I think the most overhyped technology is. I think that the metaverse is going to not meet expectations. I think that Meta, formerly known as Facebook, is planning to invest $60 or $70 billion trying to create a three-dimensional rendering of the web and mimic our work life, entertainment, our sports life, education. And so far, it's a pretty big failure. And I think it's exceptional arrogance to think that you can replicate the world digitally in this short amount of time. It took the video game industry 30 years and tens of billions to do a decent job with gaming. So I think the Oculus is a giant failure, and I think Meta's foray into the metaverse will be seen as one of the biggest strategic errors in the history of the corporate world. I think the technology that is underrated, and most people would expect me to say AI, I think that AI is a tool, but I think the technology that will most dramatically change the way we live day to day is voice technology. And I don't know if you have kids, but they just are so seamlessly integrating with voice. I think remotes are going to go away. I think we'll be able to drive our cars via voice. So I think voice technology is probably the most exciting new technology. And then finally, the thing that has the biggest impact, I think, on our society is big tech companies whose algorithms directly try to divide us and enrage us. I think that's having the most negative impact on our society, that some of our most talented people and some of our most well-resourced companies are pitting us against each other, convincing us that we're each other's enemies when we're not. Our enemies pouring over the border in Ukraine, we're not each other's enemies, and these companies have a profit motive around making our discourse more coarse.
Listen, Scott, you have already said your opinion on the metaverse. Could you elaborate a little bit more about this? Because, it's the hype of the moment. And so why do you feel it will be a failure from your point of view?
So there's some nuance here. A metaverse technically is a three-dimensional rendering of a website. So Twitter is a metaverse. FIFA, which my kids are addicted to, FIFA 2023, is a metaverse. The App Store, you could argue, has 75,000 metaverses and launches several thousand new ones every day. So you could already argue that there are certain metaverses or 3D renderings that take us into what feels like a different place and time that are successful. I think the metaverse, as envisioned by Mark Zuckerberg and Meta, is overly ambitious and so far shows no sign of getting any traction. There were about 5 or 7 million Oculuses sold last year. There were 105 million pairs of Crocs, the shoes, sold. This technology, AirPods, is one of the most dramatically underhyped technologies. This company, if this were just a company, just AirPods, it would be bigger than Estee Lauder and just a bit smaller than MasterCard. It would be one of America's 200 biggest companies. And again, it's a wearable in your ear. I think the future of the metaverse is more about audio than it is about visual or putting a headset on. So somewhere between 40 and 60% of people who wear an Oculus for more than 20 minutes report feeling nauseous. So I think that the virtual reality is somewhat overhyped. I think augmented reality, going by an apartment building in Milan and holding your phone up, and it tells you which apartments are for rent, and you can press a button and begin chatting with a broker. I think that has huge potential. But the idea that we're going to be wearing clunky headsets and going into a different world to work or to learn or to play, I think is a fever dream and a ridiculous assertion. And I think it's already playing out to be a total failure. Meta stock is at a 5-year low right now.
Scott, a question on education. So technology can help with college education especially. And on the flip side, what is it that tech cannot do for our kids in school?
Well, I would argue that institutions, college institutions have a vested interest in not letting technology penetrate. And that is the dirty secret, I think, of higher education, and I'm speaking as a professor who teaches at what's considered an elite university, is that we could probably take a third or half of our sessions. I'm not saying a third or half of our classes, but a third or a half of our sessions that don't involve a lot of discourse back and forth between the professor and the teacher, and could probably put those online. And leveraging technology, do some interesting things around, it's easier to get guest speakers virtually, it's easier to do real-time polling. So if you took a third to half of the sessions online, sort of overnight, you increase the supply of freshman seats at a great university by 50 to 100%. So I would like to see NYU and the Bocconi dramatically expand its freshman seats, because I think in most Western countries, we've made the mistake of engaging in a rejectionist culture where we've made it too difficult and too expensive for young people to get a college degree. And the result is there are fewer on-ramps into a great middle class or upper middle class lifestyle. So I think technology could play a big role in education. And I think that, unfortunately, educational institutions and faculty who see benefit in making everybody show up for every class such that they can charge outrageous fees have been somewhat slow to adopt technology. So I think technology could play a big role, especially at higher ed. I do think with K through 12, or kind of primary education, if you will, it's important that the kids are together every day. I think there's real benefits to that socialization. But I think higher education could benefit from the scale and growth that technology might be able to offer. On a broader level, just speaking to children, I think that technology has played a huge role in the massive increase in depression across our youth across Western nations. We've seen dramatic upticks in instances of self-harm and suicide across the European Union and America. And one of the contributing factors is that social media will begin serving teens and young people content that normalizes depression, or even there's a tragic story of a young girl named Molly Richards here in the UK who at the age of 14 killed herself. And Facebook and Pinterest, when the algorithms figured out she was depressed, began serving her images of pills and nooses and razors. So I think that social media and technology has had serious downsides for our young people, but I think it could play a big role in helping to scale freshman seats and supply such that more people can access our great universities, both in Italy and in the US.
Yeah. I think you mentioned a couple of ethical questions. So here's the question. The other side of technology is ethics. What are the biggest ethical questions that we should be asking ourselves when we look at where technology is and where technology wants to go?
Well, a lot of people will point to AI, and I think that's mostly a kind of an interesting scientific question, but I don't think that's the question of the day. I think the question of the day is that should social media have a profit incentive and be able to monetize teen depression, or be able to monetize making our discourse more coarse? You could argue that Europe is more unified than it's been in 50 years. I mean, Putin's strategy has failed. There is a European Union. All 27 countries in the EU came together for sanctions. That was remarkable. In the United States, we're energy and food independent, and our vaccines are the best in the world. So geopolitically, comparatively to the rest of the world, we're really strong. And with the leadership of the EU and America, democracies continue to win. Every day there's more people being ruled under democracies than autocracies. The question I think we have to face is that, are we tearing each other apart internally? And that is when some of our most well-resourced companies and most talented people work for companies that have algorithms that have a profit motive and making us hate each other. In the US, a third of each political party sees the other political party as their enemy. 25% of Americans would be happy with an autocrat as long as it was their guy or their gal. 54% of Republicans in the United States, which is the conservative party, are worried about their child marrying a Democrat. And I think that Europeans and Americans, Italians and French and British and Americans need to realize that we will never have greater allies than each other. And unfortunately, technology is pitting us against one another and making us falsely believe that we're each other's enemies. We're not. We're each other's allies. And so I think the biggest question we have to face is, do we have a responsibility to ensure companies don't have a profit motive to dividing us and kind of eating ourselves from the inside out, if you will?
The other question on technology is, it is changing so fast that there is a clear issue of consciousness, awareness, alphabetization, whatever we want to call it. How do we solve for that so that the public is informed and educated about what's going on with tech?
That's a tough one. So in the US, only somewhere between 4 and 8% of our elected officials have a background in engineering or technology. So just as industrial production of sugar and fat resulted in diabetes because our instincts haven't caught up to the institutional production of food, our instincts and our laws and our regulation hasn't caught up to the scale of technology's advance. And just as we turned fossil fuels into energy, when we turn attention into money, there are externalities, there are negative attributes. And our ability to understand those things and regulate them has not kept pace with the advances of technology. So what can we do? I think we need more elected officials who understand technology. I think we need more younger people to be elected. In America, half our populace is under the age of 38, but only 5% of our elected officials are under the age of 38. I think we need to have more regulation and more liability. I think if a company's activities can be directly engineered to teen depression or weaponization of our elections or an insurrection or misinformation about vaccines, I think that platform should be held liable. So in the US, it's a reform of Section 230. It's more regulation. I think these companies should be broken up. I think competition would solve a lot of problems. I think there's a lot of parents that would like a video platform that doesn't radicalize young men. They would like a photo-based sharing app that doesn't depress our girls. And there's no incentive for these organizations to address these issues because they have no competitors offering a safer platform. So regulation, more youth in our leadership positions, and antitrust, breaking these companies up, is what I would recommend.
Mr. Scott, you talk about regulation. It's clear that US, EU, and China have different approach on technology, safety, and ethics and rights. What are the main differences between these three regions, and which do you consider the right path?
Well, at the end of the day, I think that the Western path is the correct one, but that doesn't mean we can't improve it. I think free speech, or the ability to say pretty much anything about pretty much anybody, is pretty much any time, is a hallmark of a healthy democracy. At the same time, we should observe that China does not allow a video platform to play controversial content to youth. I think we can learn that if the Chinese consistently kick out our media companies, should we let their media companies penetrate our societies and have unfettered access to our economies? I think just on a trade basis, there's an asymmetry of what we allow them to do in our populace. I'm worried about TikTok. I think that there is no separation between the Chinese Communist Party and a Chinese company. And if you read the privacy terms of TikTok, you're agreeing to have your keystrokes tracked, not only in TikTok, but across any other app. And if I were the CCP and I had a vested interest in diminishing the geopolitical power of the European Union and America, I would put my thumb on the scale of content that portrays the European Union and America in a bad light. And so I worry that separating ownership from the product is necessary when it comes to TikTok, where now in the US, kids are spending more time on TikTok than every streaming platform combined. And I would argue that the Chinese, who are very sensitive to foreign media companies, typically they let a Western media company or tech company in just long enough to steal the intellectual property and then prop up their own company. I wonder if they're not the smart ones and we're the stupid ones, because at a minimum, it's a trade imbalance. And at worst, I think TikTok could be the ultimate propaganda tool that raises an American and European generation of civic, military, and government leaders who feel less positive about the European Union or America. So I think we can learn from them. But at the end of the day, I think we want to opt for free speech and democracy and open platforms. But I don't think it's an absolutist argument. I do think there's changes that would make sense.
Listen, you talked about the Western approach. Do you feel that the US and the EU have the same position on these issues?
No, if you think about it, the European Union rightfully has a different approach, because in the United States, we're a net gainer from big tech. And that is, big tech companies provide huge economic upside. They build ecosystems. They drive up the real estate prices all over the U.S. They hire hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the United States. Amazon is the largest recruiter out of my class. There are some downsides: misinformation, teen depression, polarization, and those should be addressed. I would argue in Europe that you're net losers, that you get all of the downsides. You get all of the misinformation, the election misinformation, the misinformation on vaccines, the polarization, but you get a fraction of the upside. There aren't that many universities or hospitals in Italy named after Facebook or Google billionaires. So I think the EU has understandably taken a tougher stance against misinformation and anti-competitive behavior and privacy violations in the European Union. One, because these companies haven't been as successful buying off or funding politicians, and two, you have less upside and the same downside. So the calculus is different in the EU, and I think you've taken a tougher stance. I personally think it's understanding, and I advocate for it.
Listen, let's remain on the ethical side. Individual rights, online and globally. Who should set the rules?
I don't know. I don't think there can be one arbiter. I think each nation elects people who have to be responsible for determining the laws and approach of that nation. And I think if the European Union can coordinate laws across the union that are for anti-competitive reasons or to protect our youth, I understand. But I think it's, at the end of the day, I think that we need to make those decisions, the citizens of our country, by electing thoughtful people with domain expertise. And right now, there really aren't any rules, because what big tech has been very good at is delay and obfuscation. And that is to pretend these problems are much more complex than they are, to donate money to governments, to elected leaders, to run exceptionally powerful public relations campaigns. There are more people in the PR department of Facebook than there are reporters at the largest newspaper in Italy. So they're constantly spinning their side of the story and ensuring that politicians who want to delay and obfuscate get funding from them. The result is a lot of nothing, and that is we're all very cognizant of the problems, but no regulation gets passed. And also many of our regulators in European Union countries are outgunned. Facebook and Google have almost near limitless capital to hire lawyers and lobbyists and public relations executives to confuse, delay, and obfuscate. So I think it's our responsibility as citizens to demand more from our leaders, that they protect our children, they protect the integrity of our election, and they ensure that Italians and Americans aren't fighting within our own borders because these companies have an incentive to kind of enrage us every day.
Scott, you touched upon AI or metaverse at the beginning of the interview. A general question: is technology neutral according to you?
Yeah, I don't believe that technology is sentient. I think at the end of the day, you can reverse engineer almost any technology to someone making a decision. So I think Mark Zuckerberg has purposely made a decision to allow the algorithms are benign, but when the algorithm sees that they can keep a 14-year-old girl more glued to her phone and more glued to Instagram, if it serves her content that normalizes self-harm, it will continue to serve that content. Now, the algorithm itself isn't evil. The algorithm is just observing data points and trying to figure out a way to keep the person addicted to their phone. But Mark Zuckerberg has decided to ignore evidence that shows that 1 in 8 UK teenagers cite Instagram as a major cause of their mental illness. So technology, I think, is a tool. I think it's benign. I don't think it's sentient. I don't think technology makes decisions on its own, at least not yet. There's always a human somewhere responsible for programming that algorithm. And just as these algorithms are serving up content that's bad for us, we can figure out ways to undo that problem. And I think that these companies promote the illusion of complexity. They make it sound more difficult. They make these problems sound more complex than they are. In the US, when we removed one account, the real Donald Trump from Twitter, 30 to 60% of election information went away overnight. When Amazon got critic bombed, and that is a bunch of false anonymous actors started writing negative reviews on their Lord of the Rings series, they took the platform down for 2 days. They used AI and ID verification and reposted the comment section, and it was honest and had more veracity. Yet Google and Facebook can't figure it out. I think they created an illusion of complexity because what we're talking about here isn't the realm of the possible. We could solve a lot of these problems. We're talking about the realm of the profitable, and that is it would require them to make substantial investments, create more friction in their business model, and as a result, they pretend that it's much more difficult, that these problems are unsolvable. That's not true. These problems are of our own making, and they can be unmade.
Yes, you have spoiled the last question a little bit. From your point of view, how do you see the future? Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
I'm optimistic. So my book, Adrift, my first book was called The Four, and it was basically an examination of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. And it started out as a love letter to big tech. I love these companies. I know their leadership. They've hired a lot of my students. I've made a lot of money owning their stocks. But by the end of the book, having done a lot of research, it was somewhat of a cautionary tale. I got increasingly skeptical. I got increasingly pessimistic about these companies as I got to know them more. And writing this book, Adrift, outlining the biggest problems that face the West, the problems are huge, but what I also realize is that there's no problem that can't be fixed. Income inequality can be fixed. We need a progressive tax structure. We need more investment in our middle class. Teen depression can be addressed. We can force these companies to be legally liable when a kid takes their own life because they've been served up content that normalizes suicide. In the US, we passed a climate bill that's going to reduce carbon emissions by 40%. The European Union is taking strides against, not only against privacy, but is pushing back on Russia. The weapons and the strategy and the intelligence being provided to the Ukrainian people is nothing short of remarkable, and we're pushing back on tyranny for the second time as allies together. So I came out of this very hopeful. All of these problems are of our making, and they can all be unmade. There's nothing wrong with the European Union or America that can't be fixed with what's right with the European Union and America.
Very clear. It has been a pleasure to have Scott or Professor Galloway with us today. Thank you very much, really, for your clear view and your opinion and your visions. Thank you to all who has been with us today, and with Frank and me. See you next time on CEO Confidential.
Thanks, gentlemen.